becoming a special educator, I realized that I bet you a lot of people have had that same experience who really, really wanted to be a doctor, who were really, really meant to be a doctor. You know what I mean? I think that, in all honesty, it didn't occur to me that I might have a diagnosis until my last public school assignment. Could you imagine? 40 years later, when I was an administrator, and people would come in to talk to me in my office, and I couldn't sit and listen for more than about 5 or 6 minutes.
Welcome to Successful with ADHD. I'm Brooke Schnittman, and if you have ADHD and are feeling overwhelmed, chaotic, and negative self-beliefs, you're in the right place. The Successful with ADHD podcast shares my guests' journeys of overcoming challenges, offering their tips and strategies for success to empower you to take control of your life and thrive with ADHD. Let's get started. I'm thrilled to have Dr. John Castronova here. He's a licensed mental health counselor, and he also has a lot of experience in the school systems. I worked with Dr. Castronova in the Jericho School District. He was my direct supervisor, and he worked his way up there, and then he worked in private school, and I know you also worked in the city. So give us a little more of an introduction of who you are and what you do.
I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for being on.
It's something that terrifies me, but at the same time, something I've always wanted to do. So thank you. I grew up in Brooklyn, so I went to Brooklyn College, undergrad and grad. So initially I thought that might be a doctor, medical doctor, because I did well in school early on. But when I got to undergraduate school, I found things much more challenging than I had anticipated. We could probably talk about that later when we get into things. But long story short, I did always have a fondness for education and psychology. I sort of gravitated toward those fields midway through my undergraduate work. I became a special ed teacher initially. I enjoyed that for a while, but I couldn't handle, this is going to sound terrible, I couldn't handle being trapped in a classroom all day long. I would literally have anxiety by the end of the day. Meanwhile, never thinking I had ADHD, mind you, right? I just thought that, I was an emotional person and, whatever. So I got myself out of teaching by becoming a school psychologist because I still loved education, still loved psychology, and it was a great fit for me. And then everything was great from there because now school changed from mostly lecture and textbook and things like that to more practical, more internship, more hands-on. So for me, it was like a perfect fit. And then eventually got my doctorate in school in clinical psychology and my degree in administration. That's a whole nother conversation about how I ended up in administration because that wasn't my plan.
I don't think it's anyone's plan to end up in administration.
No. Definitely not. I really wanted to be a supervisor of school psychologists, and I was in New York City. I spent 13 years in New York City Department of Education. That's where I started as a teacher. I was a supervisor of school psychologists for about 15 minutes, and then they drafted me into administration. And then that was the next 20 years. That's, and that's where we met towards towards the end of my career, because I retired from Jericho in 2019. Mm-hmm. And now I'm just full-time private practice.
Loving it?
Love it. I wish I would have done it a long time ago.
Sure. But you got there.
Yeah.
So you said that you, in your schooling, in grad school, it was a lot harder than you had expected and also felt trapped in the classroom. Can you explain what that felt like?
Sure. Again, I never entertained the idea that I might have attention deficit, right? I just chalked things up to boredom, to anxiety, to which I did have anxiety, but I just thought, I picked the wrong field. Like this wasn't for me. Mm-hmm. I mean, I did really well K to 12, I was like an A student all the way through. And I got a scholarship to go to pharmacy school undergrad. So
Wow.
I definitely had the average and the ability and all that. But I think I was learning in a way that didn't work when I got to undergrad. I suddenly realized that I wasn't organized enough. I didn't have discipline to do things ahead of time. I always did everything the last minute, and I got away with that.
Because you were smart enough.
K to 12, right? I guess, right. I guess so. So, right. So I compensated because I learned quickly and easily. And so I didn't have to study a lot. I didn't have any of those skills when I got to college. And so I started pre-med and I crashed and burned in 2 semesters. I was done. I mean, I could have learned how to do all those things, but I didn't know who to go to and where to go. And so I just gave up on that trajectory. And listen, I ended up where I was supposed to. That being said, becoming a special educator, I realized that I bet you a lot of people have had that same experience who really, really wanted to be a doctor or really, really meant to be a doctor. You know what I mean? So
Absolutely.
I think that, in all honesty, it didn't occur to me that I might have a diagnosis until my last public school assignment. Could you imagine? 40 years later, when I was an administrator and people would come in to talk to me in my office, and I couldn't sit and listen for more than about 5 or 6 minutes because they were talking about all this, a lot of details and a lot of, different than therapy. In therapy, right. I get in the zone and it's like,
one-on-one.
It's fantastic. Yeah, it's great.
You're interested.
Right. When people are coming in with problems and technical stuff and whatever, and then I would notice they would look at me and they'd say, well, I guess I got 10 minutes of John's time and now he's no longer interested.
John is tuned out.
Yeah. And I realized that I would be multitasking. I'd be looking at my computer. I'd be looking at my phone. Anyway, long story short, I started to realize that, hey, maybe this is what was going on all along.
Mm.
And that's why I felt a lot of anxiety. And that's why I had, it affected my mood, and I got depressed and, different periods of time in my life where things weren't going well and I couldn't figure out why. So it all kind of makes sense.
Do you have a formal ADHD diagnosis?
No.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously you can't officially diagnose yourself, but because of your practice, you know what the symptoms of ADHD are from the DSM-5. And I'm sure you've looked at that and said, oh yeah, this is me.
Yeah. I think it's just really, it's an informal assessment of my history and just how I learned to do things, right? Because now we realize that I put systems in place that helped me overcome a lot of that, because I would never have survived in a lot of the administrative roles I was in had I not had calendars and technology and reminders and multiple secretaries and,
Yes. You were very neurotypical. Yeah, I think it's important that you highlighted the fact that you made it through high school with flying colors, and so many ADHDers have average IQs or above, and we do learn ways to compensate. And I don't see you as the hyperactive type where you would be getting out of your seat. You might have the racing thoughts, but it might have not been spotted in school because you're not outwardly showing your symptoms. But that tuning out piece that you're talking about professionally probably happened when you were growing up too. And it's amazing that when you go to college and you don't have your parents or your teachers acting as your executive functions, you're off to your own devices. You don't have those tools. And you said it yourself, like you floundered, and who knows what would have happened then. Obviously, you made it to the place that you need to be and you want to be now. But there's so many students out there that go through that same struggle because, unfortunately, we don't always teach students. I mean, we both were educators. We don't always, especially in a general education class, teach students life skills, executive function skills. unless maybe it's in their IEP as a special education student.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that school systems are beginning to understand that they need to at least provide some level of general strategies and skills and the use of techniques for everybody,
Yes.
because it should be part of the universal approach to working in elementary schools, because those are all skills that even if you don't have ADHD, it will enhance your ability to succeed later on.
Absolutely. We all might have a struggle of executive function at some point of life. Doesn't mean you have ADHD, like you said,
right?
But someone might have a difficult time organizing or prioritizing, and absolutely that can help.
I honestly think that what kind of saved me midway through grad school and beyond was, you're going to laugh, the availability of computers, because when I was in school, I typed on an electric typewriter.
Yeah.
So I know I look very youthful, but
and use the whiteout on the typewriter.
Yeah, all that stuff. So the use of a computer, and then eventually like voice to text, and things I use now, like if I'm doing a presentation or I have to prepare a report, like all of that has now made it, I don't want to say completely neurotypical, but it makes things so much
easier.
Just like normal. I don't know, I can get stuff done. It's not such a struggle. I remember even when I had to read for school, I would fall asleep reading, because it was so much mental. Yeah,
trying
to concentrate and block everything out.
I mean, I hear that so often. Yeah. Same thing. Even when I read now, I fall asleep, even if I'm interested in it.
No, me too. But I use some of those programs now that are text to speech. Then I can focus
better.
Because if I'm looking at it, like I can't listen to books on tape in the car
without looking.
I have to. Yes. I have to have both, and then I'm able to concentrate.
Yes. Yes. We use that with my 9-year-old. He does text to speech through Speechify, or we find his books on YouTube or whatever program. And then he has his reading books from school, and he knocks the books out in so much less time and verbatim can summarize what he read. It's amazing.
Yeah. It makes a big difference in terms of comprehension, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of compensatory tools that you use now. And I think it's obvious that many individuals with ADHD have writing struggles. And if your brain is racing faster than writing, it's hard. So doing that speech to text is so helpful to get out everything. And then you can organize your thoughts after that. So that's a great strategy. Yeah. So you've jumped like many of us, but in a way where you have gone up the ladder through the education system. And then you started your own practice. So what was that like for you in transitioning from job to job or position to position?
Well, I think that, as I said before, I started out teaching, and I worked in private special ed schools first, like AHRC, UCP. I started there, and really I did enjoy that because that was much more hands-on, and there was a lot of movement in the room, and you were doing a lot of different activities. I enjoyed that a lot. Then I switched to public school, and I worked in a middle school, like a small class, I think like a 15-1 learning disabilities class. That was when it started to hit me that this wasn't going to work for me. Modifying, writing IEPs, it was a lot of reading and writing, right? Because that's what I'm supposed to be teaching. I was getting
labor
intensive. Yeah, I was getting overwhelmed with that because you have to, because you're a teacher, right? Yep. I mean, it's 24/7. You go home and you're preparing all night for the next day, and
you don't stop.
No, you don't stop. So that was a lot for me. again, not realizing why it was a lot for me, but it was a lot for me. And then the confinement, right? So anyway, so I went into school psychology. I continued at the Board of Education in school psychology. That was great. I enjoyed that. And then I had some family life changes, whatever. I moved to Massachusetts, decided I wanted to get out of New York. I moved to Massachusetts. I was a school psychologist in Massachusetts, rural Massachusetts, for 3 years.
Wow.
That was awesome. I love that place.
Very different population.
Yeah. I would get invited to barbecues.
Oh.
I would get called at the school to come and get their son out of the tree because he wouldn't come to school.
My gosh.
It was just in the country. It was beautiful. It was great. I really enjoyed it. Then I came back after 3 years, came back to the city, went back into the city system. In the meantime, I decided to get my doctorate. Always wanted to be in school psychology, always psychology. And like I said before, an old professor of mine who was a superintendent hired me to be supervisor school psychologist. And then, I don't know, 2-3 months later, the CSE director, they were transferred and they said, you're now the director of CSE.
What was that like for you?
Honestly, my first response was, what does a director of CSE do? They're like, don't worry, you're going to be great. Don't worry about it.
Did you feel like you had to say yes? Or did you feel like there was this part of you that felt privileged that they wanted you to be the director of the CSE?
I would say it's a little bit of both. I naively thought that it was something special.
Yeah.
There was a part of me that wanted to believe that. But also the DOE is, if you've known anyone that's worked there, it's a tough place to be a teacher, let alone an administrator. So you do kind of feel like you can't, it's an offer you can't refuse kind of thing, or you'll end up somewhere else.
Pushed somewhere.
Yeah, they'll just send you somewhere else, that you don't know where you're going to go. So yeah, so that's kind of how I ended up there. I stayed there for a few years. It was the expectation of what they wanted me to do was insane there. And by now I started a family on Long Island and it was a long commute. Because I was going to Brooklyn every day. Yeah. So I left the Board of Ed and took my first position on Long Island as an administrator in Uniondale. And then I just Uniondale to Locust Valley to Jericho, kind of like that. And then spent the last 11 years of my career in Jericho.
What would you say, do you think any of the movements besides, moving out of the city because of your family, do you think any of the other district movements had to do with your undiagnosed ADHD, wanting change?
Okay.
So I know that's a tough question. You don't have to answer it.
No, it's not a tough question. I was avoiding it. So if you look at my resume, I think with the exception of Jericho, my last job, I never stayed at a job more than 4.5 years tops.
It's common.
So again, didn't know why, but yeah, I get bored.
Yeah.
And the only reason why I think I stayed at Jericho so long, well, one, because there's probably nowhere else to go after that, honestly. I mean, it's one of the top districts around, right? But I think because I did half of that time as the assistant and then the second half as the director. So my role technically I did have 2 jobs at Jericho, really. I did switch.
Yes, you did.
I have to say something had an impact on me that
sure.
I just would get, I can't think of a different word. I would just lose interest. I would just get bored.
Yes.
Okay, I did all the stuff. I learned a lot of stuff.
Absolutely.
And I'd get to and then I'd be like, okay, well,
now what?
I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to keep.
Let me go back to school and do something else.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. I'm right there with you. I remember doing a year at Elmont, 5 years as a special education teacher in Jericho. You were my supervisor. Then you moved me to CSE chairperson. I think for me, it was a little bit of ego that once I was tapped to get my administrative degree, I had to be an administrator. So then when I found out I was doing the exact same thing as the CSE chairperson, I was like, okay, I'm really bored. And this is too much paper pushing, not as much helping children one-on-one or in a group setting. So yeah, it is so common for individuals with ADHD to job hop every 2 to 3 years, whether it be their own doing or because they're not performing. Now you're in private practice. You love what you're doing. You control what you do every day. You control who you see. So you can constantly evolve in the job that you're doing right now.
Right. Definitely. And I think that the thing about having a practice working individually, and I work with couples, I work with families, so we run the gamut, but I think that it's always something different every day. And so I love coming to work. I look forward to seeing the people I see, hearing what are we working on? What did we accomplish? What do we still need to work? Like what happened? What's going on in your life? Job, family, relationships. To me, it's like, I don't know. I feel like I finally arrived, it's like I did all this other stuff I'm proud of, working in special education departments, making sure that students get the right programs. Like I did a lot and I feel really good about it. And I was always passionate about it. When I got bored at a job, that would be the sign to me that you can't continue to do the level of job that you expect of yourself and you need to change. I would never let myself get to the point where I became disinterested or apathetic or that never happened because I wouldn't let it. So I knew I had to leave when I started not wanting to go to work every day, and I did, and I would leave. And I was just very fortunate that I was in, I'd say almost every time, maybe not every time, but almost every time it was a step up. If anything, I got something lateral. I was just really fortunate.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So I think it's, really wise of you to know that you don't see yourself as a subpar person. So you had to take the initiative to find something else because you want to do what's best for the job, what's best for you, what's best for the clientele, whether it be the students or the clients. So you don't want to show up in a way that's not your best self.
No, definitely not.
And I think that sometimes we tell ourselves these stories that, we just need to do X, Y, or Z, and then we'll do better. And maybe that is the reason why some individuals with ADHD do get fired or do have problems in their job, because they get to a point where they feel like they've plateaued and it's not interesting anymore. And then their job performance goes down because they're not energized by the role.
Right.
And you figured that out before it got to that point.
Right. And it's scary and it's risky to leave a job that you've had for a number of years.
Yes.
To go, to
somewhere you don't know.
Back out into the unknown. Right.
Yes.
So, I understand why, even feeling unsatisfied in a job, I could understand why someone would not want to leave.
Absolutely.
And hope that it's going to get better, right? So
yes.
But, for me, maybe I do have a little impulsivity.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. For me, I was like, I had to get out. It was like that first classroom as a teacher. I was like, I have to get out of here. I'm losing it. Like I have to get out of here. Yeah. And I had a great run in Jericho. I was there a long time, 11 years. And we did a lot. We added a lot of programs. I mean, we did a lot of great stuff. But I knew they didn't want me to retire. I wasn't asked to retire. There was no reason for me to retire. I just said, it's enough. Like, I need to hand this over. Someone else can do this,
That's really brave of you, because that literally is the golden handcuffs. So you were top level administrator at the best school district in the country, and you chose to leave, given all the benefits, given all the support, all of the resources, and having good relationships with people because you knew you needed a change.
Yeah. 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 No, that's true. That I can honestly say that was the truth. And for myself, I knew I needed to do what I started out to do, be a psychologist. Okay.
Mm.
I was an administrator for 20 something years, and that wasn't the plan,
Sure.
So
yes.
now I get to do what I wanted to do since I was 25.
Do you mind disclosing how old you are?
Yeah, I don't mind at all. I'll be 65 next year.
So you'll be 65 next year. So you're 64 at an age that a lot of people retire, and you're finally doing what you love.
That is a true statement.
So do you have any advice to people who start out going to school for something they believe they're truly meant for, and perhaps their path changes? Maybe they're tapped on the shoulder by an administrator or their parents or their friend, and their path varies. So do you have any advice for those people in that situation?
Well, I know that it's very challenging to get an education, find a job, stay in a job. The climate these days, with layoffs and things like that, it's very tough, and I get all that. My advice would be that try the best you can to be true to yourself and be honest with yourself, and take the path that feels right to you, because in the long run, it will work out. In the long run, you'll get to where you want to be, and work is not a means to an end. It's not, oh, let me get to retirement. Work is your whole life. You spend more time at work than anywhere else in your lifetime. And so, to the best of your ability, try to stay true to what you wanted to do. I know so many people that spend years and years doing something else because that's how they ended up there somehow, right?
Sure.
And then they only get to do the thing they love after they retire, or late in their careers, or after being unhappy for years and years and years. So I wouldn't say that I was completely unhappy, but I was doing a lot of things I didn't really want to do just because I got so far into it. I couldn't
get out.
I couldn't go back. Right. I couldn't go back to being, I could have gone back to being a school psychologist, and, financially and for my family, that just wouldn't have made sense, So yeah, I think better to get the support that you need from the right people to do what you want to do and what you need to do. Like, you don't have to do it alone. There's
absolutely
people who can mentor you, support you, teachers, whatever, so that you can follow your dream, and your passion.
I love that. And when you're in it, it's so hard to see out of it. I remember when you told me, hey, do you want to be a CSE chairperson? And I said, yeah. You said, are you sure? I said, yeah. Brooke, are you sure? I'm like, yeah, I can do this. So sometimes we might not want to listen when we're in it. So sometimes we just need to take a step back and really follow our gut, right?
Agreed. But I think that everything happens sort of in the way it should. And it's just a matter of whether you're listening and paying attention to the signs. So it's okay if I get personal with you, right?
Absolutely, please.
Okay. So you chose that path, right? You suddenly decided, I'm going to step away from teaching and I'm going to be an administrator. And you followed that, but then you were able to muster up the courage to say, this ain't right for me. And not only that, I'm leaving it all together. I need to do my own thing. And so had you not chosen to take a risk and be a chairperson, right, you may not have ended up where you are now, which, seems to me you're pretty happy.
I'm very happy. You're absolutely right.
But again, things happen along the way that maybe you end up where you don't want to be, but it is where you're supposed to be if you figure out and take the chance to do the next thing. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Take that risk. If something's not right, figure out why it's not right. Is it you just, a performance issue, or is it that you really just don't like what you're doing? Even if we think we know what we want to do, when we first start in our careers, there's environments that might work for us. There's bosses who may or may not work for us. There's big organizations or small organizations that might work for us. There are systems that may or may not work for us. So even if it's the right career, if it's the right profession, it still might not be the right environment. So we're always learning as we move on from job to job as well.
Yeah. I think you're always learning, even if it's a miserable environment. You know what I mean? You're still learning something.
What you don't want to be like as a boss, or what you like. Yes, we're always learning systems and new things. So John, this was great. And I love that we got your perspective, a licensed mental health professional, and my previous boss and mentor, and someone I've held in high regard for 15 plus years. So if someone wants to get in touch with you, they need therapy, whether it be individual or couples or family, how can they reach you?
The two easiest ways would be obcounseling.com, and my email is oysterbaycounseling@gmail.com.
Perfect. We'll also put that in the show notes, so the direct links will be there if someone wants to reach out to you. Thank you so much for being on Successful with ADHD, telling us about your journey from psychologist back to psychologist for yourself. It is a full rainbow, right?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Successful with ADHD. I hope it helped you on your journey. And if you need any additional support for you or a loved one with ADHD, feel free to reach out to us at coachingwithbrooke.com and all social media platforms at Coaching with Brooke. And remember, it's Brooke with an E. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.